One of the reasons we do that, remember, we said the purpose of financial statements is to tell stories to a number of audiences. One of the audiences is people who want to know before we pay for some of the somewhat fixed costs, like how much I pay my salaried workers, like the CEO, CFO, yada, 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 rent, advertising, and other stuff. How much money do I make? That's the gross profit. Let's give an example of that. Let's see. I'm going to go to financeyahoo.com. I'm going to look at Starbucks. A lot of you spend money there. Don't know why, but you do. Financials. I want income statements. I want quarterly. Look at it. Starbucks sold over the last 12 months. That's what TTM means, trailing 12 months. $36 billion worth of stuff. But of that, 26.4 was cost of revenue. The money they spent on the coffee itself, how much they pay their baristas, you know, electricity that you need to use to make the coffee, and whatever the inputs are. But they get to keep about $10 billion. Let's calculate that. 10,046 divided by 36,475. So Starbucks is keeping, for every $100 worth of frappuccino that you guys buy, they're keeping $27.50 in before they spend money on anything else. These kinds of things are useful. For example, let me look at the annual numbers. Let's see what that number was in 2021. 8,391 divided by 29, well, 60. Oh, that was about almost $29. So that means they're losing some gross margin. Okay, that's among other things that may be one reason they have a new CEO now, because margins in this business is tight. You have a lot of competitors. My motto for Starbucks is burnt is not a flavor. I'm a snob when it comes to coffee. Unless I'm dying for coffee and there's nothing else around, I do not go to Starbucks for coffee. I make my own coffee at home. Worst case scenario, I go to Panera because I have monthly subscription that gives me free drinks all month. They basically, I basically pay for it in one weekend. I like doing all of my work at Starbucks during weekends or Paneras. Then we're going to look at other numbers, things called operating expenses. Okay, these are expenses you make that is related to your main business. You got to spend money to sell. That means you're going to advertise, give promotions, you give, depending upon the business, bonuses to your salespeople. These are all selling expenses. You obviously have some general expenses like the rent and that sort of stuff, and administrative expenses, people you pay in the headquarters. Whether you sell 100 million cappuccinos or one, you're going to pay these people the same. And depreciation and amortization is also there. Okay. Not everybody puts them in there. Some people put depreciation and amortization under cost of revenue. But when we're doing our problems, we're going to separate them. When we say costs, you're going to say, you know, cost of revenue plus other stuff. Then you're going to look at the operating income. Let me make this thing smaller. One thing I need to kind of warn you about operating expenses. This is not necessarily relevant for this class, but if you're going to use financial statements to make decisions about which firm is cheap or expensive, as part of uh, operating expenses, sometimes you're going to see R&D. Of course, that's going to be limited for Starbucks. I don't think they do much research and development. Uh, but if there was, for example, let's look at, let me see, Apple. They have about $30 billion worth of R&D expense. Not all of that is actually R&D, especially for tech companies, especially at the upper level. The way you compensate your workers is not straight up. You know, if you're a high-level executives in Apple, you're going to have a certain base salary, which is typically a relatively low amount. But in a lot of cases, you're going to get something called stock-based compensation, which is either they give you restricted stock, which means here's 1,000 shares of Apple, that's yours, but for next 5 years, you can't do anything with it. You can't sell it. But that is an expense. Since it is an expense for your future performance, a lot of companies classify that under research and development, or they give you stock options. For example, you know, Apple trades at, let's say, $220 now. If I grant you a stock option now, I'm going to say, okay, you have the right to buy the Apple stock, 10,000 Apple stocks at $220 over the next 10 years. That means over the next 10 years, except for the 3-year vesting period, once the 3-year vesting period is done, if Apple stock is trading at $1,000, you can simply bring 220 times 10,000. I'll give you 10,000 shares. You can sell it in the market for, at that point, $10 million, which means you made about $7.8 million. But as of now, there is no so-called intrinsic value, but that doesn't mean that the option is not valuable. In fact, we have relatively complicated ways of attaching value to those options. If you're a finance major, you're going to see those in investments class and or the portfolio class. If I'm teaching the investments class, you're going to see it. If somebody else, who knows? By the way, I will be teaching investments class in the spring. And let's say those options are worth $3 million as of today. Since you can't use it over the next 3 years, it's as if I gave you $3 million for the work you're going to do for me for the next 3 years. That means every year I'm going to write off $1 million, or every quarter, $250,000. That's cash-based, stock-based compensation. And if you go to Apple's cash flow statement, we can see that number there. Technically, it is not a cash expense. Right here, that's 11.5 billion dollars. So the actual R&D Apple spent for is about $19 billion. Again, for the purposes of this class, you didn't even need to know that, but just looking at that number doesn't mean Apple spent $30 billion to R&D.